Welcome to an episode of This Is My Life. Well, kind of. I'm assuming you've come here because you want to know a little bit about my work history when it comes to logistics. And you probably want a little bit of background of where I did get my start, even if this is the more targeted video. Well, I got my start in the mid or the late 80s with my first computer, which was an Apple IIgs. I started to do upgrades on them. Um, because it actually came as part of the kit my father had bought. So that's kind of where I started playing with computers. That was the first one I ever got to play with. And then in the mid 90s, I started working at companies like Computer City and CompUSA, and I was a salesperson. And from that, I was able to build a repertoire with the upgrades and PC repair people, and they would take me back and show me how to do some PC repairs. And I also built a friendship with a guy who was doing a lot of LAN gaming parties. And when I would go to his house, he actually taught me how to use TCP/IP, which is the protocol that's used on the internet for the internet, to set up computers to make them talk to each other and set up file servers. From there, I went to college and I also took some MCSE Microsoft certified professional classes and learned a lot about networking and exchange and just overall how does everything work and communicate in this Microsoft world that was being built at the time, mostly by Microsoft. Although the others existed, they just weren't very popular in the business world. From there, I ended up working for a software development company that did GIS and a lot of different mapping technologies for the government. And what they did is they developed that type of mapping software, including software that would allow you, and this is in the late 2000s, you could take a satellite image of something like Paris and you could actually make it 3D and fly through uh, Paris, and that was really unheard of. This is really precursor to Google Earth, and heck, even this is a precursor to Google even existing, for that matter. So cool stuff, and with they were running technology like Exchange and Microsoft Domains, and I set up some cool tech for them. Like they were running some of the first VPNs made by Microsoft, and they were running some of the first Blackberries. Um, from there, I built. I kept building, and I ended up opening my own managed service provider firm. And after years of building that practice and working in lots of different industries, I ended up working for a freight forwarder out of Atlanta that had just opened up. I think they're in business about 2 years. They had like a 3,500 square foot warehouse in Forest Park, and their company was Future Forwarding. Now, they were really, really, really basic. They were part of another company initially when the two of them started the company, and then for whatever reason the business dealings fell apart, and they were left holding the bag, and they said, "Screw it, we're going to start our own company," and they did, and then they ended up tagging on to this other freight forwarder out of the UK, which already had several offices. From there, they were able to build a relationship with companies exporting um, technology and goods out of the UK and became a quintessential essential forwarder for UK to US exports. So one of their first customers was a company called Ted Baker. Ted Baker, which is now failing or has failed, was literally when I first started. I remember going into that warehouse and seeing maybe one rack in the warehouse with uh, it was they had actually built hanging racks. They'd set them up within their posts in the bins of the racking system that they had, and had hung up all of these suits. It wasn't a lot, but they hung up all these suits inside the garment bags, and they're sitting there. And you're like, well, that's interesting that they're dealing with. They've got this big. Well, for me, walking into freight forwarding, this relatively big space, and here they've got a few racks of suits. Not even enough to fill up Men's Warehouse. If that's you know, if comparatively, it's a teeny weeny section. It's just men's suits. So fast forward, they were running a multitude over the years. After I built their VPN, they were running a multitude of different freight forwarding softwares. They kept trying and out different things. And then I think about 2009, they came across CargoWise and WiseTech. So when they came across WiseTech, they said, "Oh, this is interesting. It's certainly doing a lot of things, and it has all of these components. And this is really ERPs were at the very beginning when it comes to freight forwarding and when it comes to um, really even in the industry. 2010 ERP was not a word that we were using very often. We didn't look at integrating our software functions with our CRM, with our accounting software, with our whatever else that ERP was doing. Um, Usually you had your accounting separate, you had this separate, and you had this separate. And to some degree, it remains that way today, depending on what industry you're in. Well, CargoWise is definitely doing something different, but I was brought in because it was really, really difficult to understand, and it was really difficult to follow along with the instructions that they had. And it was also incredibly difficult to get any information from the company because they are notoriously not a hands-on company. Um, Even back in 2009, 2010, they were not hands-on. So when I did the deployment for CargoWise, we actually did build it in-house. It was a self-hosted. This is really before CargoWise decided to offer hosting. So you would actually get your license to Microsoft SQL from WiseTech, and they would be remotely helping you install and set up that software, which was kind of cool. But primarily, what I did was once we got that set up, other than Ted Baker and one of their other major customers, we had all of these other small accounts that we were the 3PL for and handling all of their warehousing distribution for. So all of those accounts came into another WMS, which wasn't associated with their two largest customers, which they're like, hey, it's here. It's not free, but it's built in, and we don't have to go make a purchase of yet another software. I want you to learn the WMS in CargoWise. So that was where I really got on top of the initial setup, my foray into CargoWise was the warehouse module. After learning the warehouse module and helping them out and making, making some instructions and some workflows, they were able to use it, but they weren't very happy with it. But it did work for what they were doing, which was a very small distribution for only a few customers. Their complaints were valid because there was some foresight put into the way that they developed the warehouse module, which was, hey, we want to make sure that we can keep track of every piece of freight as it comes in. Well, in larger warehouses, that's an issue, but like in their warehouse, it was like, okay, we want you to scan it into a staging area and then scan it anytime you move it, you need to scan it into this. We didn't have all of these steps that we couldn't turn off. And there wasn't space available to build these steps in, and it didn't make a lot of sense because a lot of the stuff we got didn't even have barcode did locations or tags on it coming from the factory. Sorry, I apologize. So from having all this experience with Office and SQL and CargoWise, I then learned some of the freight forwarding concepts. And that led into me working at Mitsubishi Logistics, where they had just deployed, they had really just deployed it, but hadn't understood how to use CargoWise. So I was hired because I had CargoWise experience, which virtually nobody else had, and I went in there, and it was really a crumbling infrastructure, and not only was it crumbling, but it was not very cost effective at all. So I went in there and I really completely revamped the way they thought about IT, and the way that they utilize technology, by creating things like SOPs around how we input data into CargoWise. Um, I replaced their phone system with a high-end voice over IP system. Um, I implemented a container tracking system that was apart from the one that CargoWise was coding at the time. Actually, I worked on multiple different. Um, I played with different vendors to try and get container tracking, um, reliable. It was never really reliable, but it was improved to some degree. It was an improvement over what WiseTech had at the time. Um, I also worked on workflow and I worked on security rights, and we did some EDI discussions and EDI optimization. Um, I was leading a team of people, and then I was kind of sucked in, and as I was at Future Forwarding, to some larger warehousing projects. So at Future Forwarding originally, I was um, engaged to help them build out. I think it was about a 75,000 square foot warehouse, typically for a customer, where I was working directly with the customer as uh, Future Forwarding's IT guy. Um, and we had to meet all of their requirements. Then at Mitsubishi, as a full-time employee, I worked there, and we had a 150,000 square foot warehouse that we acquired um, in California, and I did the entire build out of that warehouse in terms of everything from video cameras to the servers we're running, to the WMS, to uh, what else is there? I mean, it was literally everything from the computers to the guns to the printers. Um, so uh, that was kind of a huge project, and my teams were pretty small at Future or at well, both at Future Forwarding and at Mitsubishi. So it was very time consuming, a lot of hours. But one of the things I will say about Mitsubishi is I learned a lot more management, um, and I understood because I was deployed at different branches for weeks. I became an extension of headquarters, and headquarters really had never interacted much with the branches, and so I became this extension, and I was able to take my time at each branch and really understand and report back to headquarters and say, here's what I'm seeing. And with that information, we were able to really improve processes and standardize the way the company was operating, which had never really been done. Um, a lot of process optimization, a lot of oversight on my part. After we did some training with the staff, we would go in and honestly look at how the data quality was that we were receiving at the branch, um, all the way down to an individual level, because it was so difficult to direct and get the buy-in of the branch manager. And I'm going to speak to you as if you probably understand that, but it really is true. The branch manager is primarily focused on the customer itself, whatever that customer's demands are. Um, and sometimes you'll have, middle managers or deputy managers, and really, you don't get a lot of oversight. The only people that are really overseeing files are on imports, and that's the customs people. Um, and even then, they're not looking at them. They're more worried about their HTS codes. They're not looking from an oversight perspective of where that shipment is going or if the data is entered properly. So I learned what these people were doing, how they were managing, and I could go in and with headquarters blessing, we were able to reteach and rerun and refocus some of the branches that were really off in left field, uh, and center them, and you know in some cases clean up staff that needed to happen, and promote staff that was being successful. And these things would never have happened um, had headquarters not realize what I was seeing was there was such misalignment. So um, from there, I ended up working at I ended up going back to Future Forwarding, and Future Forwarding at this time has this large client now. That large client was Ted Baker. Ted Baker actually had us building out a 360,000 square foot warehouse here in Atlanta for them, specifically for them. It wasn't going to be any other customers in there. And they were doing a lot of 3PL, um, a lot of, I mean, it's apparel business. So it, it was everything from let me build out this warehouse for you, which I did, to process optimization, to WMS deployment, and all of the issues around the WMS deployment, mostly because of the WMS program that the customer had chosen. Um, and when I went back to work uh, for Future Forwarding, they had replaced me, which my role wasn't as major, um, you know, in 2013 or 2012 with a friend of mine actually, whose experience was much more. Um, he had just tons more experience in doing a development project like this, which it became a development project because there was so much EDI and so many requirements via the customer uh, using a WMS called Synapse that had never been used in that way. So it was not only a development project for us with the EDI requirements that the customer had, and the EDI that they were sending us was coming out of a totally different format than would have been accepted by Synapse. It was also a development project because they needed Synapse to do a lot of different things than what they were doing by default. Ultimately, unfortunately, the project using Synapse failed, and there was some fallout because of that, and it had to be everything had to be really redone. So the fallout ultimately was repositioning of me, which I ended up leaving, and I went to another forwarder, um, and I did their full deployment of CargoWise during the pandemic. Um, with their full deployment, it came a lot. We did a lot of integrations with EDI with overseas agents. We did a lot of integrations with EDI, and we were using some of the modules I wasn't even that familiar with, um, and we were finding a lot of limitations within these modules. So it was a real good learning experience, and it made me much more aware of a lot of additional limitations that I already knew. I knew there was limitations within WiseTech and CargoWise, but I learned a lot more about the limitations. So from there, I was given an opportunity to become a consultant for a CargoWise partner or professional, and we were working on really large customers like Noedem and um, Siva, as well as really small customers, and doing deployments in things like Hungary. And we were using some of the newer modules that weren't quite finished, but they were there, and they were using the stamp of approval, but they weren't quite finished because we could prove there were stop gaps. But anyhow, that's beside the point. Um, so a lot of my history, a lot of it with CargoWise, a lot of it with some exposure to some WMSs. I've known a lot about barcoding. I know a lot about um, pick paths, process flows within WMS. I know a lot about um, compliance. Oh my gosh, do I know a lot about compliance when it comes to CTPAT or customs compliance? I follow the industry really well. You can if you look at my LinkedIn page, you'll see me blogging about what's going on in logistics and my opinions on them as an editorial type of comment. And what I do know is, I'm aware of what's going on. You won't find too many guys like me who use the system. I'll read the news. I'll go out and I'll say, hey, this ship has sunk or is listing or is going to fail or has lost containers. Well, let's go see what we have on this ship in the system. And a lot of times you'll see me go out, send off an email, send off a report, and here you go to the branch managers and to the C-suite and saying, hey, we have problems. There's this ship that's listing or is lost cargo. This is a lot of times this is way before they've even come to me and asked, which in my opinion is being proactive on things like this is so important because it's how you provide better customer service. So from there, I've moved on to a WiseTech partner. So I'm moving back into consulting and essentially the managed service provider world. And it was it's a big leap moving from an environment where I'm dealing with forwarders that are smaller, up to up to 300 employees. Um, Actually, I think in the case of future forwarding, we had almost 500 once we got the warehouse up and running. Um, to a world where we're consulting for some of the top 20 in terms of size freight forwarding companies in the world. So we worked with companies like Noatum, but we also worked with um, small companies that were doing the transition to CargoWise, such as we had a small company out of Hungary, and they were literally doing a full deployment as well. In the case of Noatum, we had um, an existing instance of CargoWise that was in existence prior to the acquisition by the bigger corporation. So this is where I really, really love the fact that I worked at Problem Solved, and I learned a lot more about management consulting and what um, what they did is they helped. It opened my eyes to polish in terms of how do we present information to these larger corporations, which throughout my career, I've only worked for a couple of really big companies, and I only did it for short periods of time. So my my knowledge, which a management consultant comes in and looks at your corporation and says, uh, "Are we running duplicate processes? Are we optimizing the way we operate this company in a way that makes the most efficient use of employees' time?" Um, they can be involved in things like helping you define what it is that CEO is trying to achieve. Maybe it's helping define or write a mission statement for a company. Maybe it's looking at overhead and how we can reduce overhead by optimization of what phone system was put in. Management consultants come in and they have this eye for finding problems and making improvements, just like in the movie um, Office Space. You know, if you haven't seen that movie, it's a great movie. It's very much ultimately what management consultants do, and it's not a term that, well, it's not a term endeared by many employees, but it's not also a term that we use very often anymore because I think it's gotten rolled into other roles disguising what is a management consultant because of the stigma, thanks to movies like Office Space, that management consultants gained over time. So, what I want to explain to you is I really did learn a lot and valued a lot of the skills and information I obtained from Problem Solved. Problem Solved had a lot of polish uh, and a lot of ways to explain to some of the much more powerful CEOs or the much larger corporations in a consolidated way. Here's how we can make your company better. Um, and it was a lot of exposure uh, to what I was doing, but it was how to present it in a way that's more polished. And these are skills that I've valued to this day. Some of the people on this at that company are really skilled at at being part of the solution. There's a I think I wrote it somewhere where I said, "What is problem solved? Problem solved is a think tank attitude for the freight forwarding industry," and that is something I've always kind of advocated. Is I want to be part of the solution, never part of the problem, and I want change to be effective. And what I've got out of problem solved is a collaborative effort where we could take all of these people and um, use their skills and their knowledge of corporations and make appropriate change, value change, where ROI can be measured. And it's been a very neat experience. And they gained a lot of knowledge from me because I ran my own uh, management and consulting firm, which they'd never done before. I'm sorry, not management, MSP, managed service provider firm, meaning I've worked with smaller companies too, or I've worked with companies in a consulting role or in a deployment role or in a support role, and they've really always worked for other corporations. So it's neat that they were able to glean a lot of information from me, and there was a lot of back and forth. But what I value really is the polish and the way I could present information in a more consolidated way. So moving on, I was offered a position at FedEx, and at FedEx, I was brought in brokerage, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. Um, not as part of the team that was doing the digital transformation, but more as a offshoot team that was only focused on U.S. brokerage. And there wasn't a lot of collaboration. There was a lot of compartmentalization. There was a lot of tripping over each other, and it wasn't a fit that was going to lead to a lot of success. There was also a lot of on the team that I had. There was nobody who had CargoWise experience, and they were being led by outside parties that I felt their agenda was a little bit um, more for their return on their own investment in the long term, and not so much for the benefit of the company. And ultimately, it just didn't work out. But I learned a lot from working on that project because I'm working in a sector that is parcel based, and I'm working in a sector that was going under scrutiny of regulations like Section 321, and and how we can provide that Section 321 through CargoWise. It was absolutely fascinating. There were some components that more think tank like, and then there was a lot of strife, and it was a difficult role where I wasn't in a powerful enough leadership position to really take the reins. So I ended up going back to Problem Solved, where we ended up working on SIVA and their deployment. And SIVA had a really well put together deployment plan and a really well put together team of seasoned CargoWise people that understood and had outlined guidelines that I continue to state to this day are the right way to deploy CargoWise. And I haven't seen that in many of the deployments I've experienced over my career. I haven't seen a deployment put forth where we are going to build, we're going to take note of exceptions, but let's build a core solution. And then we're going to figure out what we do with these exceptions and how we treat these exceptions without overstating within a workflow environment what can be a lot of noise if you're a employee. So I love the way that they were doing their deployment, and their deployment was also very, very visual in the sense that they had buy-in. I mean, these were not professional consultants; they were just experienced in the industry, and I love the way that they were presenting this information so that there was buy-in from the CEO and there was buy-in from the branch manager of whatever country that we were deploying, and there was visual boards using Monday.com that all of these people can access and can check off when they've done these things. It was just a really well designed deployment, and unfortunately, it got canceled because SIVA purchased another company, and that company was slightly farther ahead in their deployment, and they've from the CEO's office, they said, well, since they have deployed 8,000 more users in X amount more countries, they're further ahead. So we'll just go ahead and move to their instance, which was not my favorite thing. So let me bring you to today, which is where I'm working is a commercial real estate brokerage firm, and I'm working with a person that I actually met when I was my own management managed service provider here in Atlanta. And this person was a real estate closing attorney. And what he's done over the years, and I've continued to help him over the years, is grow from really nothing into a multi-$100 million a year commercial real estate and multi-entitied company. So he's got his hands in multiple segments. It's not just commercial real estate. And I was brought in because he needed a person with higher intelligence to help guide him and bring him into an era where he has just grown and bought a huge property with 4 commercial buildings with 600,000 square feet of office space, and he needed the I've worked with him since the beginning. I built his network, and he wanted somebody with that knowledge, and he was nice enough to help me while I'm trying to find this long-term position with one of you guys. And what I've built is a much more secure, sustainable. What I put him on is a path to continued growth with stability and security in mind by setting up SharePoint SharePoint organization structures through Teams, through VPNs, through routers, through just a lot of looking at corporate compliance um, in terms of how a corporation should be run. It's not that it wasn't being run well; it's just I've set them up for continued growth. So let me explain these. I hope you've um, understand where I am. Let me give you some takeaways really quickly. So, what is it that I'm looking for? I'm looking for that long-term um, corporation that will use me in a way where I can bring the skill set that I have, which is everything from Office 365 deployments to Windows domains to Azure to ERP and freight forwarding and compliance minded mindset. I mean, I do understand export compliance. I read CT-PAT guides. I read the, the literally on the U.S. Customs website. I'm always reading what are the requirements in terms of cybersecurity and things like that. To your corporation, you're going to, I can be utilized in a way where I can provide you optimization. And I want you to utilize my skill set of observation and my skills as leader and my knowledge that I will bring with me to help lead a team, preferably, into um, a goal set that you'll outlay. You being the CEO, you being whatever. I'm hoping the CEO is involved and they're have an outlay of what is their goal. What define it? Is it build a customer service oriented company? Build a IT forward centric thinking company? Um, I will bring these this knowledge, the skill set, this refinement, and what we hope is you can utilize that, and I will be able to help you build a better company. And I can make your company more money by having somebody like me on staff. What am I looking for? Well, I can fill roles, honestly. Anything from a managing director from a smaller freight forwarder to an IT director or CTO, even to some degree a CIO. I'm the guy who is approachable. I'm the guy who wants to talk to you, and I'm the guy who has lots of industry knowledge, not just about IT. I learn whatever industry I'm in. If you look at my blog post, I'm constantly talking about what I'm seeing within the world of logistics. I'm seeing a lot of scary times, and I think I can bring a different approach to what is the solution to some of these scary times. And these are when you get to know me, you'll understand. People talk to me because I'm knowledgeable, um, I'm intelligent, and I'm worth that. I'm worth the engagement, and the knowledge that I can bring is something you probably won't get every day. Um, what I'm not is a developer. I I'm not great with code. I'm not going to write code. I'm not